Hello, welcome to cEDH Budget Brews. Hi, I'm Tim. Tonight I'm joined by Cricket and Squirrelmob. Both of them are admins and deck helpers from the Budget Brews Discord with me. They help out a lot of people with getting lists tuned up and optimized. Also, Squirrelmob runs the cEDH Metagame project, as a lot of people are familiar with. He does data collection from self-reported games and then converts them into a metagame snapshot of what the current meta looks like in some areas, in some play groups. Cricket also helps, is the big cheese at the Grixis Mean Girl Discord. I know, it's funny when people say that. I know, Ashani always gets me whenever he calls me the big cheese.
I mean, I prefer to be known as Regina George of the server, but you know.
So, Cricket, why don't you go ahead and say hi today to everybody?
Hello, everybody. You've probably seen me a couple times in some of Timmy's videos. As he said, I'm in charge of the Grixis Mean Girls server. Also a deck helper over on the cEDH Budget Brews Discord, and I've been playing Magic for a while. Probably over a decade. And yeah, we're here to discuss some really great philosophies and some really great data that's just been collected by Squirrelmob. So,
and James, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Cricket. And James, you want to say hi?
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm James, Squirrelmob. I do things with numbers, and then I write about them. So hopefully you like it. Like Cricket, I've been playing Magic a pretty long time. I think this is year 18 or so. No, 18? That's not right. This is year 20. We're coming up on year 20.
Oh man. Your Magic career is almost old enough to drink now.
I know, right? Paper boomer.
Oh. So, all right. Well, I think we should probably open up with the Metagame project. How about you guys? So, this got published exactly when? Because you posted this a couple weeks ago.
This most recent update went live March 27th, 28th, something like that.
So, like 4 days ago?
Yeah, over the weekend. Sunday?
Okay,
Sunday.
yeah. Okay, so we're recording this on April 1st. This was released the previous weekend.
March 32nd.
Yeah. March 30. I almost did say March 32nd.
That's the joke. That's the April Fool's joke.
That is the April Fool's joke. So, we talked maybe, about a month ago about the one that you released in February, towards the end of February, and we kind of went over, some philosophy stuff then. We got a lot of feedback from people that it was something a lot of folks found just kind of informative and aligning. So I guess maybe we should kind of maybe start with an overview of exactly what the Metagame project is, a little more detail than what I did.
Right. So for anybody who is unfamiliar with it, the cEDH Metagame project is a very surface level data snapshot of what's going on potentially with the cEDH metagame in a broad sense. Now, I'm hedging my words here a lot because part of the way the project works is that the data is all self-submitted. And so while it generates numbers, and over the course of the year plus that it's been running, we've gotten over 3,000 games at this point, or at least 2,000. Wow. Maybe 2,500, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Somewhere in the ballpark. Okay.
Yeah, which seems like a really big number, but over the course of a year, I would imagine that number is actually probably less than 5%, maybe even less than 1% of all of the cEDH games played. Right? So we're talking about a big number over the course of a year, but it's really not that big in the grand scheme of things. Right. And so it's important not to take too much away from this, but it does give us some general ideas.
It does. Cricket, how familiar are you with the Metagame project?
So I've read it over here and there. I usually take a look at it
Yeah, whenever I see
maybe a week or two after it's been posted, just to give people time to provide feedback. And what always interests me the most about it is where turn games end. Because for the longest time, we were a self-proclaimed turn 3 format. And what this data is showing actually is that we tend to go a little bit longer than that into turn 4 and 5, it looks like. And barely under for turn 6 versus turn 3. It's 78 versus 63. So that's insane when you think about how many people are like, games, cEDH is such a fast format. It's over turn 3. It's just too quick.
What I like to do,
where is that?
I like to take that idea of a turn 3 format and think of it not necessarily as when the game ends, because you're right, the games do end a little bit later, and sometimes you got games that go, on and on and on. But I think the turn 3 format moniker is reasonable if you look at it through a certain lens. So if we say, on what turn do important things happen?
Right, or the wins
often that's going to be often that's going to be turn 3, because if games are ending turn 4, turn 5, that means you're not really getting many more turns after turn 3. And so if we think about it as if my deck, goes land go for 2 turns, am I really going to be in this game?
Right.
The answer is probably no in most cEDH games.
Right.
But if you can go and have a turn 1 play and a turn 2 play and then do a couple things on turn 3, then you're cooking with gas. And so I think that's where the name, at least in my opinion, that's where the name still fits.
Yeah. So historically, at least from Wizards' perspective, when you hear them use a moniker of X format as a turn whatever, it generally does mean, when are those wins being threatened. But also it's more of when are those wins being threatened in a vacuum. So essentially it implies when you're goldfishing. So if you goldfish a deck in Vintage, it should be able to reasonably start to present a win turn 2, turn 3. Legacy is turn, I think technically is the same speed. And then I think Vintage is turn 4, turn 5. So maybe Legacy is turn 3, turn 4. And I can very much see cEDH kind of somewhere in between Legacy and Vintage on how fast are we threatening the win. But the caveat is that much like with Legacy and much like with Vintage, when you have 2 decks operating on a competing axis and competing at a similar power level, the games tend to go longer. Not always, but a lot of times, people can get bad hands. So it looks like from the latest report, it seems that most of your games are ending on turn 4, turn 5.
Yeah, and they're really, so this last report, they come out monthly. This last report only had about 90 games added to it, so not a lot changed in the grand scheme of things.
Right.
But we saw similar reinforcement of trends that we've been seeing. So since the launch of Commander Legends, and really since the banning of Flash, it's longer than just Commander Legends.
Okay.
But we've seen a shift as things have started to get a little faster. Right, so when Flash was still legal, a lot of submitted games were ending in the turn 6, 7 range. And now we see more in the 4, 5 range. Right. So things have picked up the pace, not a ton, right? That we're only talking a turn difference here. Well, but with 4 players, a turn's a lot of time.
That's usually about 15, 20 minutes in some instances. Well, and the other thing is, is that if you're behind, if a game is ending on turn 4, and as you've kind of alluded to in other parts of the report, is that a lot of times favorably positioned wise, from the numbers, is that seat 1s and seat 2 generally tend to to progress the game a little bit faster. Like you have player 1 at a 36% win rate.
Mm-hmm.
Player 2's at 22, and then player 3 and player 4 are both at about 20%.
Yeah.
So if the game is ending on turn 4, which is when it really starts to spike up, like it goes turn 3 is 15, and then turn 4 is like about 17, and turn 5 is 18. Like if you're in the 3rd or the 4th seat, that's still only your turn 2 or your turn 3. Like, yeah. I've played a lot of games where I've gone Landork, go, untap, play Thrasios, and die. You know, or play Tymna and die. Because nobody else in my pod had interaction. I also didn't have interaction, and then somebody had it, or there wasn't enough. And that's not always the case, but I mean, some number.
And even looking like, I think that these numbers are somewhat more movable than like necessarily the numbers for any given deck out of any given update, simply because of the different biases within the data. But with the number of games and the percentage of games that players are winning from certain seats, I think a thing that gets overlooked somewhat is not just pod composition, so like what decks are you playing against,
right,
but also where are they seated. So who do you need to be aware of doing what in what position?
When? Yeah.
Right? Because a deck like, say, Evolution, which is really heavily reliant on dockside, they're not going to be able, in most cases, to string together a turn 1 or turn 2 win if they're playing from the first seat.
Right.
Because dockside is going to have less power. Whereas a deck like Blue Farm, for example, has a lot of speed and raw power because of its rituals and things like that, where it can win pretty quickly from seat 1 or seat 2 on turn 2 or turn 3 without a ton of difficulty if there's not enough interaction to fight it.
Yeah.
But if there's enough interaction built up beforehand, going from the last seat is a little more difficult.
Yeah, exactly. And to further kind of iterate this, for anybody who's watching this, since it is a budget channel, these numbers are being pulled generally from budget lists and mostly proxy metas. So if you're playing in a non-proxy meta, or you're playing in like a high power or not online, or like, it's like your local friends, it may not necessarily ring like this. These are just the metas that are being submitted. Like Cricket. Like I know you play. Oh, I'm sorry. Go on.
And these are specific metas too. I mean, there's one of the weaknesses of the data being crowdsourced is that there's oversampling of certain metas, right? So like in the most recent version of the forum, which has been live for, I think, 4 months now, there's a lot of Elsha decks. Elsha's a good deck. It's a popular deck, but it is not as popular as these numbers might make it seem. Nor is it necessarily as good as these numbers might make it seem. That's not to dump on the deck. The deck is very good, and the people behind the deck, Flash Andretti, and the other deck designers behind it, are very good at building it up and playing it. But it's also not necessarily gonna, if you take it to your local meta, it's not gonna necessarily give you the returns of, a 30% win rate. You have to be aware of that too.
Yeah, totally. I can dig it. So, Cricket, I was gonna ask, what about your meta? I know you play with a different group than I do, or James does. What are you kind of observing in your play?
So my meta is definitely all over the place. It tends to be whatever anybody feels like playing on a given day. I feel like what it really depends on is your decision on whether it's a mulligan or not. So we see a lot of, if you don't aggressively mull and you're in one of the last couple slots or in the seating arrangement, that you have a lot harder time catching up or recovering from the person in the first or or even second spot, especially being in multiplayer where everybody draws a card
right
on their first turn.
Yeah.
Whereas in 60 card formats, usually the person who goes first doesn't. So they lose
Right.
that advantage.
Yeah.
Yeah, mulligans are hugely important, not just in terms of the seating position, but even like with what you plan on doing with your deck, because that's impacted not just by seats, but also what other decks are at the table. And that's one of those things where, like, if I could, if I magically could see every game going on ever, I would love to actually include mulligan data. But that's another weakness here, is that like people would have to remember it to submit it, and that's too much work. So, but mulligans are one of those things that people don't think about a lot. And it right now, the way the format is, I think you're right that it really benefits aggressive.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that I've had to, especially if I'm playing like Sans Red or a non-red deck, I have to be extra diligent about mulliganing into some gas, like something that goes, and then also like slim or free interaction to play off of it. Like a lot of times when I'm like land dork go, or like, and then I'm curving into like a Timna or a Thrasios if I'm playing like that deck, it's generally on the back of having like Fierce Guardianship or Force of Negation or something like that, and that may or may not be enough, but that's kind of the plan. And then following up with some type of tutor, only to get yeeted by an op agent. Thanks, Scott.
But even speaking from the perspective of Sandscreen, like my Kess deck, right? I used to be able, when I first started playing it, I'd have a hand with 2 lands, maybe a rock, and then like a couple of cantrips, and that was fine. That would get me through the beginning part of the game until I could find what I needed to either outvalue my opponents or just win. But now, if I don't have something like a Ristic Study or a tutor of some kind in that opening hand,
right,
like it's not even worth it.
Yeah.
There's a concept that's been thrown around. I don't know who originally came up with it. Maybe Frank Karsten or somebody, but they've tossed it around in talking about 60 card formats. They talk about velocity of a deck. So how many cards do you see to get to do what you want to do? And I think mulliganing for us, especially with the free mulligan where you get a full grip of 7 once for free, is an added piece to that idea of velocity, where you get a better chance to see more things. Even though everything's still in your deck, you get that free shot to see what you need. And especially with things like Ristic Study or Mystic Remora or Carpet Flowers, Dockside, things that put you ahead on some axis of value, definitely really help.
Yeah, that's why a lot of decks are doing. That's why there's a lot of wheels running around right now, is because people are playing their hand out and they use the wheel. Like, it doesn't matter if you're giving your opponent 7 cards. It matters that you're refilling your hand in a lot of those instances.
And I mean, you're taking away that first group of 7 that they kept. So, Lord, who knows what was in that hand in the first place, and now you may have just ruined their whole plan.
Yeah, early wheels can be pretty devastating if somebody's not prepared for them.
So, before we move on, is there anything else kind of note to kind of go over with this? I know we went over it a little more extensively last time, kind of as it applied to getting into cEDH.
Yeah, the one thing that I would say is interesting, at least from a budget standpoint, are the win cons. Now, this is an optional question for the survey. Not everybody has to answer it. But there's kind of 2 or 3 win cons that have stood out as being the big ones. The big like A plus B combo has been Oracle and a Consult package, which if we're building on a budget becomes much more difficult, because Tainted Pact into a budgeted deck is a difficult thing to pull off.
It just got reprinted, so it
did. But even with the one of lands, we're still talking about like you're deliberately adding on more to your deck's price to do that.
Yeah, it's about you need about about 180 to 220 bucks to make a decent 3-color Taint of Pact mana base.
But the other two are breach style lists, which are likely intertwined with a lot of the Oracle lists, and then commander centric combos, which I think if you're building on a budget, combos that work around the commander become something that is maybe, and Tim, you can disagree with me on this, but maybe a place where you want to look to start, as using your commander as a way to both further your game state and win. So something like Gitrog falls in that category, Elsha, even something like Inala, although I don't know that I'd build Inala on a budget, but
I mean, it could be done, but
yeah, it'd be rough.
Yeah. Oh, but you know what are some good, at least like kind of that are kind of fresh and current? Kinnan. Considering, like, granted, I know some of that is on the back of Basalt Monolith, but like,
sure.
Or Grim Monolith, but like Basalt Monolith is pretty inexpensive.
I mean, Basalt Monolith's better for the deck.
Yeah, it's actually the win because you need a cost reducer for Grim. But the Basalt Monolith Mirage Mirror combo that the Kinnan House of Mirrors runs on, I think the whole combo package with like the tutors to get it is about $100.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's not like 100% out. That's like you run the shared summons, you get the Court of Calling, the Worldly Tutor, the Green Sun Zenith, the Fine Pieces, or not Green Sun Zenith, Neoform, Eldritch Evolution, like that kind of stuff. And it gets you
even
into
like using ISO-Rev combos, like Ice Crown Scepters, about $10 ish. You know,
I think that's the backup in Kinnan. Like, I mean, that's actually a pretty good budget deck to play, honestly.
Yeah, so you have a lot of options there that, you know, maybe the very, you know, top of the line premium cEDH win cons aren't available to you, but it's not like there aren't other things that are winning if you're building on a budget.
And this is one of those instances where you can actually like Kinnan's a good example of a deck that will scale really well. To be honest, like if you look at like a $500 version of it, which I don't have on hand, but I think I have one floating around. I'll look for it. And then you look at like the database list, like you can build up to it pretty handedly, and it will function and it will scale pretty well. You know, there are some lists that will perform better at lower power level, but then lose their luster as you scale up.
Yeah. And there are some where you don't really want to touch it with a 10-foot pole unless you're willing to drop money on like LED and all the rocks.
Right. That's why go on, Cricket.
No, I was going to say, but James, I think with the other portion that supports your point kind of about having commander-centric as like your budget list is that you're looking for less cards in your deck to make your combo work. And so that requires you to have less tutors, which also tend to be very expensive. Like Ink Seal is ungodly amounts of money.
I mean, even Demonic
Tutor got a reprint, so hopefully that'll drop back down to the 20 range. Vamp Tutor just got a reprint, so that's in the 40 range right now. But still, like we got Grim Tutor, which had a reprint and is now cheap again. But you are looking for maybe one or two pieces to complete your combo because you already have that access to your commander in the command zone at all times.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, all right. So, Cricket, anything that you noticed from the Metagame Project report that you wanted to discuss before we moved on?
I'm just glad Breach is not as popular as everybody makes it sound. It's still number 3.
Yeah. The other thing about these win cons is like I think there's a lot of overlap between them, and it's like a lot of categorization that I've done as well. So it's like, well, there's probably Breach in a bunch of those Oracle Consult decks, and there's probably Breach and Dockside in pretty much every deck together. If it's running one, it's probably running the other.
One or the other, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think almost at this point, even Godo's running Breach. That was a joke. I don't think it actually is.
It's a good card.
It's
a very good card.
But I don't think Godo can really capitalize on it. But
who knows? Who knew that making Yawgmoth's Will better would be good?
Recurable.
Right?
instead of getting it once, you get it every time. Yep.
And all I have to do is get rid of all my fetches and lands that I have in the graveyard that I wasn't going to do anything with anyway.
Oh, the garbage that I just wheeled out of? All right.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on to some social contract stuff. How's that sound? So, I posted kind of a, I don't know, maybe a rant, I guess you could say, on Reddit and Facebook a couple weeks ago, with some talking points that these are mostly kind of recurring things that I've seen like come up, like new players looking for help, or conversations from newer players, conversations from play groups addressed towards newer players, like, you know, just rumblings around the internet, I guess you could say. And a couple of them I discussed with Bad Dog last week or a couple weeks ago, and that just came up. But I think one that I wanted to kind of touch on right now is that like playgroup autonomy, and like making sure that if you're trying to play budget, or if you're trying to get into cEDH, it is probably the first question I've been asking people lately, and it seems to click pretty good, is to match like the overall budget, match the overall power level of the average deck in your group. Like, if everybody's playing precons, don't go play one of the decks off the website with them, because like that just makes you an asshat.
Yeah.
But also,
right. So if you don't like having friends, then by all means.
Right. Yeah. If you don't like having friends, go play one of the $500 budget as cEDH decks against a precon, and yeah. But also at the same time, trying to play one of these 500, and I've done this just like for testing purposes, and trust me, people can get salty, especially now with the way card prices have gone up. Is that like when I play like in an online proxy meta with these $500 lists, like they don't on average keep up with them. They can do okay in like other venues, but like when I'm playing on like the subreddit or on the Nexus or with my play group, that's pretty much just the Nexus, but my friends from there, and or like it doesn't, you know, or on the game server, like the budget lists don't do that very well. But if I go and I take it into more of a mixed meta or something where it's a little bit lower power, they do okay. Would you guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that people really like to pretend doesn't exist in cEDH when it does is the existence of an understanding. And in the past, I've said, and I've probably been wrong about this when I said it, that, you know, just saying you're playing an EDH game is kind of the rule zero discussion. But it's really not. It's not enough. There needs to be, you know, I'm not saying you have to do this, but by agreeing to play in a certain place, say you play on the subreddit Discord or you play on Nexus, you are agreeing to a set of understood ideas that people share.
Right.
And
kind of a
most of the conflict that comes from people, I don't know about the subreddit, but at least on the Nexus, when people have trouble playing with one another, it's usually because their visions for what they wanted out of a game didn't line up perfectly.
Right.
And that's where those discussions come in. It's still worth doing. Even if you say, we're going to play no holds bar, max power, cEDH, that still might look a little different, right?
To different people.
Yeah. And as somebody who, I don't do a lot with the database, but like I'm a deck reviewer there, so I see submissions that people turn in and I give feedback to the managers who then make the decisions. Right. So if your deck didn't get on there, don't blame me. It's not my fault. But we give feedback to the managers, and even among the reviewers, there's a wide range of views on what decks are or are not really up to the level of cEDH, and why that's the case, or why it should be or shouldn't be. And that's a good thing. But when it comes to playing, it means you have to be willing to talk. You have to be a good neighbor, right? That's kind of the idea here, is be a good neighbor. Don't leave your trash sitting out on the curb for, 10 days. Take it into your garage. Right. Be a good neighbor.
And I know Cricket deals with a lot of this just from, Grixis is, real popular right now.
Yeah. And what we see a lot of is people will say, hey, what about this card? What do you think of this card? Hey, is this card a good budget replacement for this card? And for some people, it's really hard not to say, no, that card is trash, don't play it, and then give no reason. Because if you don't give a reason, then the person never understands, well, why is it trash? If you can teach them that, it helps shift how they evaluate cards. And as time goes on and as you watch, they start to ask less and less about bad cards and start to evaluate cards more appropriately and say, hey, what about this one? And you're like, actually, that looks like a really good card. I hadn't considered that one before.
Right.
And so I think you see that lack of explanation because people are just tired of hearing about the same card over and over again.
Yeah.
Because people are like, oh, what about this one? And it's like, Arcane Denial is a perfect example. For whatever reason, every 2 or 3 months, it gets brought up, and everybody's just like, no, forget that card. It's horrible. Why are we even talking about this? And everything suddenly explodes. There's war back and forth. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, there is definitely a lot of question fatigue that happens, especially in online venues, especially in places that are specialized. I've noticed.
Mm-hmm.
And I have found personally, and this is from my personal experience with dealing with a lot of new questions, is just at some point you do just kind of get tired of having that same argument. The first 30 counter arguments that the person who wants to die on the hill has, because you've already progressed that many times, and just I don't feel like spending 4 hours arguing you into submission just for you to say I'm right when you're the 50th person, or to say I'm, for me to be wrong, because I've definitely have held opinions that are not correct. You heard it here first. No, I'm just kidding. But and particularly around budget, because a lot of times when people are trying to ask those questions, it's because they're still not quite onboarded to the idea of playing with proxies, or they're not in a position to.
Well, I think the term onboarding there is a really important one, because we're seeing, and I think this is in part due to the movement of so much play to online over the course of the past year now. Yeah. We're seeing a shift where cEDH has gone from being kind of a, 2 or 3 years ago, being derided to being kind of accepted. And now we see a lot of crossover with people who are maybe not known for playing cEDH, but are dipping their toes in now and again. Or, for example, Jim from the Spike Feeders. He's not exclusively a cEDH player. He plays across the spectrum. But him joining the Commander Advisory Group, we've gotten to a point where there's a big difference in how cEDH is appreciated and looked at. And with it have come a lot of new people. And there's not a lot of great onboarding material for new people. Playing with Power did a great video series, but outside of that, there hasn't been a ton other than some of the stuff that you've been doing, Tim.
Yeah.
And for somebody who's new to it to come in and ask questions that are part of a learning experience, as much as it sucks to do so, losing games and failing at things, that's also part of the learning experience.
It is.
But
I guess I don't.
People aren't prepared to really speak to that as much, because many of the people who are the most invested in the format have been playing it for years. I mean, I would say I'm a relative newcomer. I've only been playing CEDH for 3 or 4 years now, but compared to the huge influx we're seeing,
Right.
that's,
You're an old timer now.
Right. Kind of happened overnight.
It did. I remember the first meetup we did when I met you. Oh, those decks, man. Woo!
Oh boy.
Yeah, they were fun. I was like, oh, this is cute.
But I think that brings up another good point about the failure aspect. What I've found myself doing more and more frequently now is I'll give people an argument about a card. This is why it doesn't work. But I'll only give them that one argument, and after that, I'll tell them, go ahead and try it and see if your arguments still hold up after you've played a couple games with it. And that's usually what'll flicker the light bulb for them, because it's now their evaluation, not just some person on the internet who they just met.
Right. Who's got a bunch of fancy rolls on their name or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's things that so I'm a teacher in my real life. And there's things that we can take from kind of the ideas that people use as teaching tools in schools, because teaching is such a communication-based thing. And playing EDH at any level is a communication-based thing. And so when we're talking to new players at any level, but especially at cEDH level, there's this idea that's called I do, we do, you do, where, and this is kind of what Cricket was talking about, where you as an expert demonstrate something, then jointly with the people you're demonstrating with, you work through a problem together, and then they explore the problem on their own. Right. So the idea of this is the expert opinion. Let's talk about why that's the case a little bit. And now you go and see if your opinion and experience matches up. Yeah. That's a great example of that process.
Yep. Exactly. So that kind of brings me to the next thing on the talking points, is that different mediums for playing exist, and they all have like distinctly different cultures and feels. And as the new person, as the person who is not vested in that play group, that community, like on the other side is, I do see a lot of Magic players come in, like just as the guy who ran a play group for 2+ years, 3 years, like I have seen it time and time again. And I even see it to a lesser extent, like when people come into the Budget Brews Discord, is they come in with like a lot of preconceived notions about what they think should happen and what should go on. And when they see things that they don't necessarily agree with, and when I say agree, I just mean it goes against their sensibilities, that it's instantly like a problem. When like it's a two-way street. Like if you're coming into like the Grixis Mean Girls Discord for help, like you also need to be receptive to the help you receive. Nothing is more tiring than asking for help and then arguing about the help you receive. Like at the same time. I mean, it's rude.
You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's rude. And I did see it a lot with people wanting to come in and play, and they wanted to play their deck, and maybe their deck was up to snuff, maybe it wasn't. Different cases were different things. But a lot of times, like those types of rules, like with PlayEDH, like the rules that PlayEDH has in place are not necessarily because most people walk in the door needing them. It's for the worst offenders of those in on that server. And you have to make
set expectations.
You have to put rules in place for the worst offenders, and unfortunately it affects the people who are not necessarily egregious, or like they're not offenders essentially. And and just with that in mind, like just remember that if you're getting into something or you're going to a place for the first time, act as if you're going over to somebody's house.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
if people showed up to my house and acted the way they would, like when they showed up on the play, some of the play discords I ran, like I would ask them to leave.
Yeah.
Call the cops. Like if that was in person.
Don't come into my house and take a dump on my rug. I'm gonna throw you out.
Yeah, like if you're lucky, that's all that's going to happen.
Speaking of, I gotta go use the bathroom real quick. I'll be right back.
Okay. You know, I mean, I don't know about you, Cricket, but on that flip side, like not only do I need to be patient with the new person, the new people also need to be accepting of what happens at the same time. I mean, I don't know how your experiences have been.
I've had a couple times where, you know, I watched discourse happen between somebody who's been playing a deck for a while and somebody new to it, and things get a little bit heated, and then I'll talk to the people afterwards. And what I've seen in a lot of instances is the new player's like, well, I just feel attacked. And I was like, well, no, that's not what we're doing. We're not saying that you're stupid. We're not saying that you don't know what you're talking about. We're just offering our opinion on something we've already discussed previously. It's nothing personal at all. And I think that's what tends to happen sometimes is people take it personal.
They get a little, maybe self-conscious.
Not.
Yeah.
Right. Because nobody wants to seem like they don't know what they're talking about. Like nobody wants to think that they're bad at Magic. And so as soon as you start to say, well, that's a bad card, don't play it, I feel like that's what people get from that.
Right. Well, and that comes from kind of, it's kind of a weird kind of dance that like sometimes people come in wanting help, but then are they really wanting help or do they really just want validation?
Right.
Magic players love nothing like being right.
Yeah.
But then why are you asking for help?
Because they want to show you how smart they are. It's not about getting the help.
Right.
Sometimes. Some people legitimately come looking for help.
Like, most people, I'll tell you what, I'm going to be honest. There's this new guy that I've been helping out. His name's Elemental Whisperer. In fact, we're going to talk about one of his questions here in a little bit. I plan on doing a video with him soon. We're kind of in the works. Since he just got into cEDH about a month ago, I want to do a video with him about, like, what is it like to, like, try to navigate some of that? Getting into the format, going from offline casual group to online proxy group, and what are some pitfalls to avoid? Just you know, what are some experience, strength, and hope that he's got? Because he's kind of fresh in his head, you know? Like, I can talk about it all day, but it's been like, what, I don't know, 4 years at this point? 3 years? I don't remember. It's been a long
People
time.
were still writing on stone tablets when you started.
Yeah, the rocks were soft, and we wrote dinosaurs to the LGS, right? Actually, we still called them comic book stores back then.
Oh.
In the dark days. Okay. So anything else you guys want to add about the different cultures, different medium for, like, playing?
I think we
we've exhausted that one. Okay. I just wanted to double check. All right. So we've covered the metagame project a little bit. We've gone over a couple of the talking points. So there's a couple of questions we had picked out beforehand. So the first one was actually by one of our budget regulars, Mist Raven. And his question is, or actually his statement that is also is a question, is that they understand that cEDH is about playing the most optimized, powerful decks. But he wanted to ask that, do we ever choose decks based on having fun playing them? Cricket, you want to go first?
Sure. Do I ever pick decks based on how fun they are? Yes. But typically my fun is going for the win or having some sort of interesting line to get me to my win. Mm-hmm. But if I'm not having fun with a deck, I'll scrap it and move on to the next one. Like, I don't like stacks. I'm not a huge stacks player at all. I tried Blood Pod once or twice, and I was like, no.
Okay. What about you, James?
Kind of like with what Cricket was saying, I mostly play decks that I enjoy. I do try playing things that maybe aren't in my wheelhouse as much, simply to try them out. So I wouldn't call myself a great a great Turbo Nos player, but I wanted to know how they function, so I built an Ala and I've been playing it, even though it's not like it's not Blue Farm, it's not the traditional Turbo Nos, but it's still a Nos deck.
Yeah.
But no, I mostly play things that I think are going to be interesting or fun. And one of the things that I enjoy about cEDH is taking angles that maybe haven't been as approached to the format and trying to apply them. So like when we did the video talking about Hidetsugu, that was the whole purpose of the deck. And while the deck might be better, if it was a Godo deck with the same ideas, attacking people playing multiple spells a turn with those cards like Pyrostatic Pillar or Spell Shock or whatever, that was something that I thought was going to be interesting and turned out to be, at least a couple times I played it, not as bad as it could have been.
Right.
I wouldn't call it necessarily good, but
it was definitely a meta buster. And I mean, our team name was the Michigan Meme Dreams.
Yeah. And that's like really the thing is like, if I'm not having fun, why am I spending my time doing this? So it's important to actually find it enjoyable, because if you're not finding Magic enjoyable, then you're going to be grumpy, you're going to be cranky, you're not going to be a good neighbor because you're not having a good time.
Right.
And like probably most of us know somebody, maybe we ourselves have done it at some point, who's taken a break from Magic for a while and come back to it because it wasn't enjoyable for some period of time for whatever reason. And that's healthy, right?
Yeah. Well, because I mean, once it's kind of served, it's like, I mean, it's a hobby. If it's not enriching, then it's not really worth spending your time doing. Mm-hmm. Like, pretty much at the end of the day. So, like, for me, I'm relatively spiky for the most part, but I do play decks that I like, that I find fun. But what I do is I play decks that I find fun, that I think or anticipate to play well into a particular meta. Like, I love playing Tana Timna stacks. Actually, I just play with a lot of fatties because I find out that, like, because of the stacks, everybody's got a grip full of interaction and they're just going to use it on me if I try to win. So I'm just going to kill them with an Inferno Titan. After I try to cast it and they counter it, and then I reanimate it and they counter that, and then I do something else and get the Inferno Titan back after like the third or fourth time. But point is, I don't get to play the deck that often because it doesn't always do so well unless it's playing in a very, very heavy Grixis Storm meta, which most of the time my friends are not playing. Like, I'll have like right now Deke's playing the little coin flippy guy, Thrasios, Krark. Scott's playing Razakats. Sean's playing either Frog or Narset. Budgetize coming soon. I know, we're getting all the previews today. But I do enjoy playing the deck, so I put it together. I play a few games, I put it away. But I do generally tend to keep like Nagila around longer, or CST around longer, or Evolution, or Cass. And I do find those decks fun, just not as fun as playing the same. Like, I actually like playing. What I love is tempo decks, and Metapod is probably about the closest legit, that and Nagila, to an actual like Delver or Infect essentially. So I guess that's to make a short answer long. Anything else you guys want to add or move along?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to I think the idea of attacking, knowing what's going to be okay for a certain meta is a good idea. There are certain decks you can basically probably take anywhere and it'll be okay. Like, a lot of those proactive strategies, unless you're in a really weird meta, are probably going to be okay, right? You can probably take a Grixis Storm deck into most places.
Godo will do good most places unless everybody's
Godo will
playing.
do good. A lot of Nagila is pretty across the board a good deck.
Yeah.
But when you get into some of the more niche and meta dependent decks, right? Not necessarily decks that are specifically parasitic, because like Blood Pot can win in any meta, but it is harder to do so.
Yeah,
in some metas. And I think it's really important to like think about that, because if you're playing with the same group over and over again, you're gonna develop a meta that's gonna have interplay between it that might not reflect the larger trends at all, and that's fine.
It's called the localized.
So think about
meta.
what you're doing specifically, and I think that if people are out there thinking about like, oh well, what do I do with this? One person who probably people are aware of, but if they're not, they should be, who's really good at taking that idea of approaching the meta from a different angle, is Cobblepot. Used to be with the Lab Maniacs. You can follow him on Twitter. I think his handle is just Cobblepot.
Yeah, he's with the Mind Sculptors.
Yep. Yeah, with the Mind Sculptors now. Right. That was forgetting their name. But he has a really sharp mind, and a really sharp mind for brewing specific decks that take an angle away from the trends that he sees in the meta as a whole.
Right. Yeah. And I wouldn't necessarily trust everything in their Moxfield folder, because a lot of times, especially people
There's
like Cobble,
no brewer out there who's cracked every code.
No, and I will tell you that I have 47 pages of Moxfield, basically. I have like 600 decks on Moxfield. You only see about 30 of them. There's a reason. Most of them are dead ends. I'm still trying to figure out how to make Dragonstorm a commander deck. Yeah. One day I'll get there. I'm going to Patrick Chapin somebody.
You got to just think about it in terms of, that experimentation.
I need about four more. I need about 4 or 5 more Bogarden Hellkites to really make it work.
You need a clone that's a dragon, right?
Several clones that are a dragon, actually. I think I'm about 5 ETB dragons that kill people off.
You listening, Watsy? This is what we want.
Yeah. The 74 views we'll get on this. All right.
One of them is Mark Rosewater, and he's like, "Man,
that's a good idea." All right,
People love dragons.
People love dragons. They do. They do love dragons.
There's a Dungeons and Dragons set coming out. Maybe we'll see it there.
Maybe I'll get 5 more. All right.
There's 5. There's like 10 colors of dragons in Dungeons and Dragons. So
there's way more than that, but yes.
Kenrith Dragonstorm.
That's our basic.
Kenny Dragonstorm. Oh, that would be great.
That sounds like a really awesome stage name.
Kenny Dragonstorm? That's my drag name. Kenny Dragonstorm.
Timmy, you and drag.
Oh,
how many levels is that removed from your Uncle Daddy emote?
Oh, man. Did I ever tell you guys how the Uncle Daddy thing started? Just as a side
I've never heard it.
Okay, all right. So when I started dating my wife, she had a dog named Chico. All right. You know how if you're dating somebody and they have a kid, the kid always calls you Uncle so and so. So started out calling me Uncle Timmy, kind of as a joke. And then when me and her got married, the dog needed to start calling me Dad, but she's blonde and was kind of a dum-dum, like an actual dum-dum, not just stereotypical because she's blonde. So she got confused and started calling me Uncle Daddy. And then, it's kind of vaguely dirty. So me and Gretchen just thought it was the funniest shit ever, and it kind of stuck.
That's fantastic.
And then I embraced it, and now it's a meme on the internet.
Yep. Congratulations, you've made it. It's a big
thanks.
You're one of the greats.
All right. Our next question is from Ironic. And he asks, so he plays Zur. And the problem that he's having is that whenever he plays Zur, people kill Zur. What's the best way to prevent that from happening?
Don't play Zur.
Well, yeah, don't play Zera's one.
Hey.
I guess that's an answer.
Hey, remember earlier how we said not to give those types of answers?
No, in all seriousness, Zera's a fine deck, and there are a couple things I think that Zur has as a potential commander that other decks don't necessarily have the same access to. So one thing that I think Zur especially can benefit from, and this is going to sound a little crazy, but if you're in a meta where Zur is, the top dog and people are killing it on site, Lightning Greaves gives it Shroud, gives it haste. Zur is a commander that benefits from haste, and it's in a color set that doesn't give haste naturally very well. And so that's a card that I think if you're playing, especially a budget version of Zur, you likely probably can come across Lightning Greaves, even though it's kind of expensive for what it is.
$5.
Yeah, you can probably come across a copy of it pretty cheaply, especially because it's in damn near every precon.
It's in several precons.
In one deck or another.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and the other thing is that just limits the window that people can interact.
Exactly.
Which is kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
along the same line, there's also a really kind of lame, what do we call it? Aura from back in Masks block that back in the day, more casual Zur decks ran. And if you're running a slightly slower build of Zur, so instead of like automatically tutoring up Necropotence and just going for the win every time, which is what the Shimmer and Adnaz Zur lists typically do. But if you're not on a build like that and you want Zur to stick around for a couple turns, there's Diplomatic Immunity is the card. Costs 1 and a blue. It's an uncommon from, I think, Masks. And it just gives an enchanted creature Shroud.
So there's actually a slight upgrade for one colorless.
Oh, is there? Tell me.
It's called Steel of the Godhead.
Does it give Shroud?
Oh, no. There's another. The blue-black one does. Oh, where is it? It's the blue-black version.
One is Helm of the...
I'm looking for it. I'm looking.
But I think it costs 4, so you can't tutor it up.
No, it's 3. There was a cycle of the 3-drop ones in each color. If the creature's black, it does one thing, and if it's... I just have to find it.
Maybe it's Cloak of something?
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember what the blue... They were named after the cycle in Shadowmoor and Eventide of the 2-color that cost 5 hybrid creatures. So there was like Godhead of Awe, Deus of Calamity was the green-red one. And I cannot recall what the
blue-white one was Steel of the Godhead, which was the one I instantly thought
Yeah, that's the aura, and then the creature that is named or that is in the cycle is Godhead of Awe.
Hey, if you hear this and you can give us the name in the description, first person to do it, I'll give you something. Don't know what it is yet, but do it, and then message me on Discord with a screenshot. We'll work something out.
Something good, guys. Don't worry.
It'll be something good. I've got a goodie box. Don't worry. We haven't used too much of it, but I cannot remember the name of it. So I'm going to move on so that way I don't spend the next 15 minutes looking up an obscure card that is not Steel of the Godhead. But there is a blue-black version of it that does give Shroud. It doesn't give Hexproof. That Zur can tutor up, actually. Which is a thing that might be worth it. Mm-hmm. So my answer for the question was, 1, you're in blue, you have counterspells.
Mm-hmm.
A really, 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 really good budget counterspell is a card called Misdirection. If you're in blue and you're not playing an optimized list, and even some optimized lists will run it, like Niv, it's a free redirect. It's like Deflecting Swat, but you have to pitch a blue card to do it, and that will stop the sweeper or the spot removal from happening. And if you give it haste with the Lightning Greaves or an equivalent, like the shroud hexproof hasty stuff, like whatever the other one is that people always swift foot boots. Then you're dodging the sorcery speed sweepers as well. And so between the counter spells, particularly like personal favorite of mine is misdirection. You're in white, so you can do things like Apostle's Blessing, and that's one colorless because you pay the 2 life, and then that blinks target at removal as well. I wouldn't go too deep into it because you should be able to cover most problems with counter spells.
Yeah. And really, the counter spells give you a wide range of options too. There's misdirection, which is the free cast one that changes the target. But even if you just want to counter it, you've got miscast, spell pierce,
Dovin's Veto, Drown Lock.
Yeah, Dovin's Veto.
All the big
Drown
ones.
Lock. Yeah, counterspell itself is still reasonable, and even depending on your meta, Mana Leak can be an acceptable spell, as can
Spell Pierce.
This is a little more off the wall, but Spell Snare. Yeah. If you are in the right meta, Spell Snare is very versatile.
Another one I like is Divert. It's 1 blue, counter a spell that targets you or a permanent you control unless they pay 2.
Is it countered or does it change the target?
Or it changes the target, I'm sorry. My bad.
Yeah, it's a good card. Rare from Odyssey.
Yeah.
Don't forget Drown on the Lock, too.
Oh, yeah. Drown on the Lock. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Good old Grixis. Right?
That's what I'm here for.
Or even Counter Squall. Or Negate, but Counter Squall is a negate that drains for 2. And then Negate, obviously, is Negate.
Silence.
But I mean, if you're particularly not only are counter spells good, but there's actually a pretty decent suite of like misdirect effects in blue, and there's even some like instant speed, like give my creature protection in white, and then you have the couple of like ubiquitous haste, shroud, hexproof equipment that you can use as well. But again, just don't overload on it. Don't go too deep because. Then you start running into like poor deck composition because you have really bad card quality that's only good at protecting your commander, and trying to keep the answers relatively universal. I would say for the most part.
There's always a danger of over focusing on your meta, especially if like you play both offline and online, or you play in 2 different online metas. They're probably going to look different.
They are,
and that's a thing that you have to keep in mind.
Yep. All right. I'm going to move on to the next question. This one is going to probably be a few minutes. So this is from a listener, from a patron, Elemental Whisper. And he asks, when does something become a spite play, i.e. attacking person who Gilded Drakes your commander to try and cripple their game plan versus someone who plays a Collector Oof when there's like 5 to 7 artifacts out, doing mana denial strategies, like just like when does it cross that line from like being suppressing a threat to being spiteful? I'm gonna let Cricket go first.
I think the easiest way to answer this is just to stop and think: is what I'm about to do going to further my game plan? Or am I doing it just because I want to do it because I'm mad?
Right.
Like, how is this going to propel me forward into a win? So in the example where you're talking about killing the Collector Oof, like that unlocks my mana, which allows me to cast more spells, which allows me to accrue that advantage.
Right.
If somebody Gilded Drakes your commander and, that's also, if you really think about it, like, denying that person that resource so that they could further their game plan. But when you then blow up the Gilded Drake, right? Or you just needlessly attack into somebody because, I hate this Gilded Drake. I'm just going to get rid of it. Like, now you've opened yourself up.
Right. What about you, James?
So I think that's a good way to look at it. Another good question to ask yourself and to be fair, when I say this, most times when people are making a spite play in the moment, they're not really thinking a lot about it. But even if in reflection you think about it and you come to you answer this question: if someone did that play to me with the same situation, but our roles were reversed, would it feel good? Would it be the right play for them? And if you can't answer that question clearly, yes, it would be the right play, or even, well, maybe, then it's probably a spite play. If you would look at it and say, if somebody did that to me, right? If I Gilded Drake their crown, but this other person had, a win,
Selvala,
potentially with a tutor or something like that,
like a Selvala and
whatever.
play Reddit on tap.
Yeah, would I feel bad about that? Would I feel like I had been unjustly targeted? And if the answer is yes, then probably what you're doing to the other person is then a spite play. The other part of it is, can it be justified across across the game state?
Right.
So sometimes people will get a little bit of tunnel vision and they'll say, well, I'm going to do this thing because right now it's affecting me in this way.
Right.
Especially with like removing stacks pieces.
Yeah.
And they'll remove a stacks piece because it's locking them down in a certain way and they feel like they need to get out from under it. But they unlock other people and they lose the game because of it.
Right.
And so that's the thing you really want to think about too is the play I'm about to make benefiting me more than other people? Or is this a play that is negatively benefiting one person and potentially being better for people who aren't me? Because with 4 players, if you're making a play that is more specifically negative for a specific person,
right,
that doesn't also benefit you, then you are probably not all the time, but you are probably getting into the range of what might be a spite play.
Yeah. Well, and like for me, it's a matter of like most of it comes down to intent, because a lot of times a misplay can come across as a spite play when it's like I had a plan in my head. Maybe in retrospect, that plan wasn't very well conceived, but it was a plan nonetheless, or the plan made sense at the time, but then it like changed because of like some actions, but I had already, as a good player, and I use that term loosely, I thought about my turn while my opponents were taking theirs, and sometimes I'll get tunnel vision and things will change and I won't entirely be paying attention, or I won't have like it won't have my full attention, and then I'll make a play that kind of seems kind of king-makey or spite play, but really in reality what it was that I had a plan. I'm just kind of rote doing it, and then things have changed that I didn't new information was gained and it wasn't fully processed by me. But on the same token, if I'm making a play like if I'm attacking Johnny with my Crom or with whatever, my Anafenza because he stole my Sun Titan because he steals it every game, I'm probably not doing it because it's giving me, it might give me Timna draws, but I probably should be attacking whoever is got the Sylvan Library on the board, or the Necro, or who tutored for the Naws. Not the guy who stole my Sun Titan and is probably going to beat me in the face with it anyway.
Yeah.
That's another thing. Don't necessarily attack the person that you steal the creature from with Gilded Drake unless it really actually is worth it, because that will make people salty.
Going back to the kind of phrase I used earlier with the idea of being a good neighbor, spite plays also come down to this idea: are you being a good neighbor? And remember that you don't just have one neighbor at the table. You're in a neighborhood. You've got 3 neighbors. Right. And sometimes you can, maybe somebody else has been kind of a bad neighbor to you, but if you're a bad neighbor back to them, you might also be a bad neighbor to 2 other people, right? Yep. So if you go out and, kill your neighbor's flowers with weed killer because they hit your garbage can with their car, that's an escalation, and now you've made it less nice to look at things in the entire
Right.
neighborhood.
Yes. So, any of these questions you guys wanted to cover? There's a couple other good ones in here, but I figured I'd give you guys an option to maybe pick one or two if you guys saw any that you wanted to discuss.
So I see one that I actually see a lot of on the subreddit, and that's, is breaking a deal with a player acceptable in cEDH?
So who wrote that question?
Looks like it's from Devante or Devanta. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but
Oh, Devanta? Okay. So what does breaking a deal with the cEDH player? So, well, James, you want to start?
sure. I mean, I think this gets to kind of a similar point as the question of like, what's a spite play, right? Because when we talk about cEDH, a lot of people say, well, no spite play, no politics. This is the politics half of that. But people need to realize that politics is part of a multiplayer game, right?
It's going to happen.
Whether we have it expressly as like politics or not, people do it. And so the question here of, is breaking a deal a bad thing to do? I think it's a really hard question to answer because I think it's really context dependent. When you make a deal with a player, the board state is a certain way. Things look, a certain way that they do, and things can change, especially with hidden information.
Yeah.
That being said, to go back to what Cricket said earlier about spite plays, if you are breaking a deal, it really needs to take two things into consideration. Is this furthering the plan that you are going to do to win? And will it continue to do so later on? Because you break a deal once, that is a label that sticks to you.
It's like, yeah.
Right. So like, let's say somebody's casting an ad nause and I'm last in priority order and the first two people pass. And I might say, I will counter this, but I don't have interaction, so I would prefer you not, you with your Gitrog on the board. I'm going to ask you not to tutor up whatever to not win next turn because I'm saving us from this ad nause now. That Gitrog player then goes and, blows up the game and wins. Maybe the next time I'm playing with them, I might not throw my counter spell at the ad nause. I might let the ad nause player do their thing and then try and catch them later.
Right. Or hope they stumble because because of the way that the board state and everything has transpired in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because there is a lot of that, like, you stop one guy just to lose the next. Well, if nobody's incentivized to, if you're the only one stopping everybody, then you're bleeding out slowly. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I would say I don't break deals, but I also am very explicit about what deals I offer and what deals I accept and those terms and conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't very precise, you can get caught in a loophole where you could potentially put yourself in a position to break other tenets like spite play, king make, not following competitive mindset, like different things like that by making a deal. Like I'm not gonna like a common deal might be, I have a Timna on board, somebody's got an opening, two players have an opening, and I just kind of rotely always attack one guy. Maybe, that person might be like, hey, attack that guy because they're X, Y, or Z, Oh, yeah, good idea. That's kind of almost like that's kind of a deal. You know what I mean? In a way. Because they're pointing out something that's obviously beneficial to them by not losing the 2 life. And the other player who uses their life more as a resource to their advantage. That is a type of politicking. Is it a harsh deal? No. Because I might just attack that guy anyway. But usually if it makes sense, and it's logical, I will go the other way. Till I forget next turn and attack attack Jamaican again. And then he goes, oh, he always attacks me. It's like, it's because I can't help it, man. I don't know why.
Yeah. And I mean, going back to or continuing on that idea of, being careful with the deals you make, remember that you're playing with a group of people. Even if you're playing online, there's a chance that if you're playing on a specific server or wherever, you're going to run into some of the people again, unless you're playing on like Play EDH where there's a million people.
Even then.
Yeah. But yeah, you'll still probably run into some of the same people in the same power level. Knowing, when you make deals or people make deals or break deals or how they politic can be helpful in a game, because as much as it's all about the cards in front of you, people have certain play styles, right?
They have habits.
I'm a fairly conservative player. I don't try to jam it very often, which is why I'm not good at playing some of the more proactive decks. Whereas, sometimes you'll have players who will just sandbag interaction so horrifically throughout the entirety of the game that you have to be like, all right, maybe I've got the interaction in my hand, but I'm going to make him show me that he doesn't have that interaction.
I've had to do that to like Scott and them. I'm just like, had to like literally lay my hand down. Like, I don't have anything. I don't.
Yeah.
Because they think I have it and I'm just sandbagging because I kind of do. Well, what about you, Cricket? What's your thoughts on deals?
So, we're humans, right? We remember when people wrong us. And so, especially me who I don't play online with different people too very often, like I am usually playing with the same people. My rule of thumb has always been, if I'm going to make a deal, what I am going to offer is not to accrue value off of that person. I try to avoid making deals that could prevent me from winning, even if it is only for one turn, because I may see my one and only opportunity to win in that game, and I really do not want to be known as the person who breaks deals, but I also don't want to lose my one chance to win if that opening does present itself that I've made a deal with somebody.
Right.
So I might tell them, hey, I'll let my Remora die if you stop this, so that I don't draw off of you anymore.
Yeah. And James, you got a question or two you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, so there's one here that is a pretty spicy question and a little controversial probably. It comes from BSWCDO. No idea who that is, but they asked, can you explain the concept of mana bullying and how tapping a mana source resets priority? So I want to get into this one because I've seen it pop up a lot, and I don't know for sure, but I think there's a couple different takes in the community. And so the basics of it, for those of you who aren't aware of it, is that by tapping a land and adding mana to your mana pool, there's something in the comprehensive rules somewhere. I'm not a judge. I don't know which one it is.
There's a Latman video on it too.
Yeah. It resets the order for priority. And that gives people another chance to respond to whatever's on the stack, be it ability, spell, whatever. The idea behind mana bullying, this concept, is that because there's 4 people in the game, this can actually be used as a strategy to try to, say, I don't have removal or I don't have interaction or whatever. So if you're the last person in the priority order, it can get to you and you can be like, I don't have anything here, but I'm going to tap this land so that one of you who has interaction can do that. Now, to piggyback off of the thing that we were just talking about with making a deal, the idea here is kind of you're forcing them to, somebody who has interaction that you think is sandbagging, you're forcing them to do something.
Or reconsider.
Yeah. Or reconsider it, right. The issue with this is kind of twofold. One, because it's a weird niche ruling, it doesn't feel great. It's in the rules, but it really feels like an angle shoot when people try to use it. To me, that's my personal opinion. And when you have something where in the name they refer to it as bullying, it kind of runs afoul of same thing I'm going to hammer on here, being a good neighbor, right? At the end of the day, maybe, using mana bullying to reset priority wins you the game every once in a while. But is it worth the cost versus, okay, we lost, let's shuffle up and play?
Eroding, well, and it also erodes that good, like, it erodes, like, when your game devolves to those types of tactics and you're, like, legit not playing on the Pro Tour and you're legit not playing for, like, in the finals pod of, like, some tournament for, like, real prizes, like, it really erodes people's trust in you. On the flip side, it can also be used by players higher in priority to get players lower in priority of the person trying to win to tap out. So that way that they can win on their turn. Is actually how it got explained mostly in the Labman video that I'll try to remember to link in the description. You got any thoughts on it, Cricket?
I think it's okay once in a while. Like, if you really don't have anything to do, like, you're the last person and you legitimately don't have anything and the game is going to be over if the spell resolves. And I know, like, maybe I've what's the cantrip that I'm blanking on right now? Blue Phyrexian mana.
Get Probe.
Get Probe. If I've Get Probed you and I know for a fact you have interaction in your hand, like, in that instance, it might be considered okay to, tap a land and reset that priority. Is like, hey, I don't have anything and I know you do. Like, if you don't, we are going to lose.
We're gonna catch a bad case of death here. Mm-hmm. All right.
But I think if you consistently do that, especially if you do have the interaction in your hand, like you do it once to see if maybe somebody will do something, and then you do it again just to keep pushing it around, that's when it kind of becomes like this rude and like just unfun play style.
Yeah, totally. All right, I think that about gets that one. There's one quick one. This one's actually pretty easy. So this is from Zach. Oh boy, my computer just completely went right by it. Stop. Zach asks. It keeps jumping right past the question. What is farm and how is it usually played? So, farm is a colloquial term meaning generally an Adnaz deck with Tymna as one of its commanders. It leverages Tymna and smallish type creatures that have some other utility outside of just being a thing to attack with Tymna. Like, a good example is Turbo Naz decks that would run Blood Pet or Dockside. And you leverage those little creatures to attack and get Tymna draws to help refill your hand. So you're farming value with Tymna, and you're using your little dongers, your little creatures, to help you farm. That's like the basic. And then it kind of got popularized, and then they just everybody started throwing it around like candy at a parade, and now we don't get to use that term no more because we ruined it.
Right. The original version of it, according to the Finnish guys, I think Leptis was the one who explained it that I saw, and it came from, I think River May Cry was the first one who built a farm deck, and it was Mad Farm, Bruce Tarl, and Tim. Yep. And the idea behind it was, like Timmy said, a lot of little creatures that had a lot of extra value. Kind of one of the big key things that made it different than Turbo Naz decks about a year and a half ago was whether or not they ran Culling the Weak and similar cards that actually could generate additional value off of those little creatures after they drew you cards.
Yeah.
But the name comes from just the idea that, all right, Tymna, Bruce is a herder, and maybe Timna's his wife, and they're farmers. It's some Finnish Gothic artwork or something.
Yeah.
But Timna's right. After a year of everybody calling every Turbo Naz deck under the sun a farm
or just
deck.
Every deck farm.
Yeah, and even things that have nothing to do with ad nauseums anymore, unfortunately, it went from a term that had a very interesting and specific meaning to a term that is now meaningless.
Right. and we got it taken away. So, all right, guys. So, I know I introduced you, but anything you guys want to plug? Where can people find you? Just as a reminder.
In the pit of despair of the Grixis Mean Girls server. Also the cEDH Budget Brews server, the Moxfield server.
Oh yeah, you're there a lot. Yeah.
Into the North podcast server. I am on Play EDH in the competitive server, but I don't often talk on there at all because there's usually a lot going on and it's very easy to get lost in there.
It is. What about you, James?
So you can find me all over the place. On Reddit, I am Squirrelmob. I'm one of the mods of the subreddit for cEDH. On Nexus, I am also Squirrelmob, or the Budget Brews Discord, or a bunch of other Discords I'm around, so you can ping me in a lot of them, and I will show up eventually.
Eventually.
And you can also find me on Twitter at Hoff Occultist, HOFF Occultist.
I know, it always throws me off, man.
Yeah, not Squirrelmob there.
I know. Well, no, you were at one point, but then you got locked out.
I lost it. I do have the account Squirrelmob 2, but I use it only to post cEDH meta updates. So, so there's that one too, if you want to follow there.
And I'm Timmy T1000. I'm basically Timmy T1000 everywhere, except on Twitch, where I screwed up my name, and it's Timmy1000 _ but it ruse, because I missed a B and Shrek fingered it up. I'll change it in 3 months when they let me, because you can only change your Twitch name every 90 days, I guess. You can pretty much ping me on the Budget Brews server. That's mostly where I'm at. I'm on some other spots, on like the Grixis Discord, the subreddit Discord, some other places, but mostly I'm on the Budget Brews Discord. And if you like what you heard, please give us that share, subscribe, and like. If you'd like to support us, smash the bell. And if you'd like to support us, you can go to patreon.com /cEDH _ brews. Give us $1. Helps for all the fancy equipment so I can record these and pay for the website. Have a good night, guys. Bye.
Take care.